What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. Among all the new Overwatch 2 reworks and balance changes we've seen recently, perhaps one of the more interesting ones discussed by the devs is the reworking of Doomfist from being a damage hero to a tank. Now, at the time being, the devs have said that this isn't a definitive change they're going to necessarily end up going with, but it is something they're currently prototyping and experimenting with internally, and thus is an idea they're taking very seriously, which has got me thinking, is reworking Doomfist into a tank hero even a good idea? In today's video, I'd like to discuss whether this sort of change actually fits the character of Doomfist, as well as the pros and cons of making this sort of transition for him. Real quick first though, I would like to remind you to subscribe and hit up that bell icon to never miss out on any future Overwatch and Overwatch 2 news and content. But now, let's talk about whether or not changing Doomfist from a damage hero to a tank is actually a good idea. So first off, I just have to acknowledge the irony of Blizzard looking into changing Doomfist into being a tank hero. For those of you who've been playing Overwatch since basically the beginning, you likely remember the time period leading up to Doomfist's actual addition as a playable hero in-game, and how all the build-up teasers and speculation ended up leading a lot of people to suspect that he was going to be a tank hero before he ended up actually being added. The whole beefy Talon leader aspect, his giant gauntlet, and the rumors of him supposedly being able to level a skyscraper all built him up as being this big, intimidating character that just felt like something that would fit in the tank role. And on top of that, back in 2017, not long after Doomfist released, the Overwatch developers actually acknowledged that Doomfist was originally going to be a tank hero during the early stages of his development, but ultimately they decided to shift him into the damage category just because they felt it better fit with the abilities they wanted to give him. However, regardless of what he used to be at early stages of development, what about what he is right now? Is this a character that could realistically be fit into the tank category? There's certainly a lot to discuss here in terms of the gameplay and mechanics aspect, but before I get onto that, I want to touch on an aspect of Doomfist which I haven't seen many people really address when it comes to the topic of changing his role, and that's simply how he would fit thematically as a character in the tank role versus the damage role. A lot of characters seem pretty established in the particular role they occupy. Heroes like Reaper and Soldier 76 just feel perfect as damage heroes because of their personalities, the way they act. And while sure, there are always heroes like Mei who don't necessarily feel like they thematically fit in the damage category, but still occupy it and function well in it, Doomfist is a character which, honestly, I have to say, fits really, really well with the idea of being a tank hero. I'm sure a lot of that stems from the fact that early in development he was intended to be a tank hero, and a lot of his general characteristics and design aspects carried over into the damage version of him from that initial state. He's big, he's tough, he's intimidating, he's a leader, which absolutely fits the idea of how people have come to perceive tank heroes when it comes to their role within the team dynamic. And I think especially when we take a look at Overwatch 2 and the fact that the number of tanks per team is going to be reduced from 2 tanks down to just 1, that one tank, whether we like it or not, is probably going to end up being perceived as the de facto team leader more often than not. And while that aspect of the 5v5 format is certainly worth talking about in its own video, I think come Overwatch 2, the tank role specifically more than ever will feel like that definitive role occupied by the team's leader, and they're to some extent I think going to be seen as almost like a raid boss. They're the big, tough character on each team who's going to be leading the charge against the enemy, and I just gotta say, that role really fits Doomfist. He checks basically all the boxes of what you would expect from someone leading the charge into the enemy team. So out of all the Overwatch heroes on the existing roster who could potentially undergo a transition like this, Doomfist feels like one of the most fitting. However, that then takes us to the gameplay and mechanics side of this sort of change, which is where I think things maybe start to fall apart a bit. Even if Doomfist feels like a tank hero in terms of his character and personality, gameplay-wise, I think it's going to be a real challenge for Blizzard to balance him into the tank role. Now, the devs have already talked a little bit about how they might actually make this change, such as reducing his damage, increasing his protection capabilities, maybe changing up his rocket punch to have a sort of area effect instead of just hitting hitting a single target, but I'm very skeptical about how this would actually end up panning out. One suggestion I've seen for him is to make him more along the lines of Wrecking Ball, in that he would be a very high mobility, high disruption tank character who doesn't have a lot of team defensive capabilities, but can effectively serve as a tank for his team by just causing a ton of disruption with his high aggression. And while I admit that that would pretty well fit his character, I don't really like the idea of Blizzard just taking Doomfist and saying, let's just make him more like Wrecking Ball. I think that just terribly undermines the uniqueness of Doomfist as a character in-game, since currently he's one of the most unique heroes on the roster. He has a very distinct playstyle, especially for a damage hero, and so to take that very unique, original, and interesting playstyle that he has and just sort of shift it in the direction of another hero who already exists and already serves that disruption tank role just feels like you'd be sort of watering down Doomfist as a character. I would certainly prefer seeing Blizzard make Doomfist more unique if they were to rework him into being a tank hero, but of course that does run into the issues of what exactly you do with him. Would he need to have some sort of team defensive ability? Would you need to nerf his damage to the point that he couldn't get impressive one-shots with his rocket punch? Because while all of those seem like they'd be necessary steps in order to better balance him as a tank hero, again, I just think these would take away from what currently makes him unique and interesting as a hero in-game. That doesn't mean they couldn't come up with something as unique or even more unique than those old abilities and playstyles with a new tank version of him, but I'm just worried they're going to take too much away from the existing Doomfist and what makes him fun as a character, simply in an effort to make him fit into a more adequate role. Basically, I'm worried it's going to be a situation where he just doesn't end up fitting anywhere, because maybe he'll just end up feeling like a subpar Wrecking Ball, and thus just won't be that effective in that regard. Overall, it's a really tough thing to consider when it comes to the gameplay side of this sort of change for Doomfist, and honestly, I think really only time will tell whether it's something that can actually end up working. I am glad that Blizzard is experimenting with this and is testing out different options to potentially fit him into the tank category, since simply testing things like this out is the best way to find if it works. Maybe they'll find something that fits him, maybe they won't. We'll just have to wait and see. But one other thing I want to address when it comes to making this sort of transition for the hero is how it would affect the people who play him. Now, I personally am in a pretty good spot when it comes to Doomfist being reworked into a tank hero. I am predominantly a tank main who enjoys playing all of the tank heroes and plays them by far the most out of any heroes in game, but at the same time, Doomfist is one of my favorite damage heroes. I love his unique playstyle, and he's by far one of my favorite heroes to play in deathmatch. I might not be super good at Doomfist, but I think he's a cool character and I love being able to play him whenever I have the opportunity. So for me, if Doomfist got reworked into being a tank hero, that's basically just a win-win. I get another tank hero to add to my roster of playable heroes, and they happen to be a character I already love. So personally, I would really like it if Doomfist became a tank hero, because I think that would be a really fun change for me personally. But at the same time, I acknowledge that there are quite a few people who exist on the opposite side of that. People who predominantly play damage heroes and are maybe huge fans of Doomfist, way bigger than I am, and for them to have Doomfist just stripped away and shoved into the tank category, that probably isn't going to feel very good. I can totally sympathize with people who would have one of their favorite heroes taken away like that, so ultimately, I feel like if Blizzard made this sort of transition with the character, it'd probably have a pretty negative reception in the community. I'm sure there'd be a number of people who are indifferent, or people who just think it's interesting to see a new tank version of the hero, but I have to imagine there are a ton of existing Doomfist players who wouldn't like having this change go through. So, overall then, is it a good idea for Blizzard to rework Doomfist into being a tank hero? Well, I really don't think there's a clear-cut yes or no. There's certainly a lot of benefits when it comes to moving him into the tank category, particularly when it comes to better fitting his character and perhaps even better allowing him to work in the Overwatch 2 environment. And I personally would love to see him added as a tank, not only because it would mean I'd get to play him more often, but also because I'm just curious to see what they could come up with in terms of making him a tank, but at the same time, there are going to be a ton of players who would be very upset with this sort of change, as it would basically take away Doomfist as a character they can consistently play in the same way they have been currently. And on top of that, I am a bit worried that Doomfist's new kit as a tank in Overwatch 2 will just end up feeling like a sort of patchworked, watered down version of what Doomfist used to be, and worst case scenario might end up just feeling like a discount version of Wrecking Ball or something. I don't expect that they would mess him up that bad, but still, just the idea of messing with a character like this makes me sort of nervous about them potentially ruining what makes Doomfist as he is now such a unique and interesting character. Only time will tell though, of course, and we'll just have to wait and see what the internal experiments end up yielding, but in the meantime, I'm very interested in hearing what you all think about reworking Doomfist into being a tank hero. Do you think it's a good idea for Blizzard to take his character in this direction, or would you rather they just find a better way of balancing him while leaving him as a damage hero? Either way, be sure to subscribe, follow me on Twitter, hit up that bell icon, and come join my Discord server to hang out and never miss any of my future Overwatch content. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members who help make these videos possible, and if you'd like to join them to earn some cool rewards, then just hit that join button down below. Otherwise, this is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.